Hague is speaking at an event organised by the Policy Exchange think tank today to mark International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict. He's addressing the past, present and future of rape as a weapon of war. Comes amid a lot of criticism, of course, of the decision by Boris Johnson to merge the Foreign Office and the Department for International Development. Some support as well for that. And also in a week in which William Hague likened the government's response to coronavirus to Dunkirk, which was, of course, an act of great heroism, but in the context of an avoidable disaster. And Lord Hague is on the line. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Talk to us first about the subject of your speech today. Why now, and sort of fit it into the context of the world as it is?
Well, we launched 8 years ago, Angelina Jolie and I launched, as you will remember, the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative. And I think we managed to end the silence about this subject in the world. And we introduced some important practical measures that have led in some countries to convictions of those who perpetrate these crimes. But we haven't really ended the overall apathy, and we haven't created the international mechanism necessary to carry this forward. Now, Lord Ahmed, who works on this, who is the minister responsible for taking this forward, is taking a good initiative today, launching the Murad Code at a UN event, which is about minimum standards in documenting for the investigation of crimes of sexual violence. But this really needs now to be re-energized at a senior level of government, using part of our aid budget to support that. You just mentioned about DFID. And we should be proposing globally a new permanent independent body for the collection of evidence and the investigation of crimes of sexual violence in conflict.
What do you say to critics of the entire scheme that you and Angelina Jolie started, including the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, who said that it hadn't fully delivered on its ambitions and actually was at risk of letting survivors down? And this, I suppose, goes then to the point about DFID and about a lot of the money we cannot know, and sometimes we pretend not to be able to know whether or not it really works.
Well, their point in the report that you are talking about, that they said it was an important initiative on a neglected topic and that it had strong political leadership and so on. Their point is that that the UK hasn't followed through on that consistently over the last few years.
And is that true?
And I think that is true. I just pointed to the work that Lord Ahmed is doing. But my experience on this was that unless you lead it at the top of government, a very senior level of government, with the British Foreign Secretary going to the United Nations and the G7 and so on and saying we have to take this seriously, then other countries don't respond to it in the energetic way that we want them to do so. So I really implore the government to do that again, and I've spoken to the Foreign Secretary about that, and I hope they will do that. The UK is going to host the next conference or summit on this topic once the COVID crisis is out of the way. So it is time to re-energize this initiative nationally and globally.
Do you think the merger of DFID and the FCO, the Foreign Office, is a good or a bad thing?
Well, in this respect, it can help. I've never been a fan of reorganizing of moving all the deck chairs around in government. But if we're going to do it, well, on a subject like this, preventing sexual violence in conflict, it can be advantageous, because a British Foreign Secretary can go to the UN in future and say, not only am I working for the international mechanism, but actually my country is going to make sure that we ring-fence 1% of our aid budget to help survivors of gender-based violence around the world, to support judicial systems that will work on prosecutions. And you can actually have a much more joined up approach. Now, if that sort of thing can be achieved through a merger of FCO and DFID, well, then it will be worthwhile.
Right. A wider question about where we are as a country, I suppose. You wrote that piece I referred to in the Daily Telegraph. A lockdown is like Dunkirk, you said, heroic in itself, but the result of massive failure. Are you saying we could not under any circumstances lock down as we have again?
I'm saying that the human cost of a lockdown, the cost to young people that you've just been discussing on your program, the cost in mental health and so on, is so great that this cannot be what governments contemplate doing again if they can possibly do something to prevent that. And there are things they can do to prevent it. Tony Blair was on your program 2 weeks ago, and I totally agreed with him, advocating investment now by the government in the type of tests, the instant point-of-use tests that many companies are trying to develop, which we will then all be taking when we arrive at an airport or an office or a conference. We'll give you the result in 15 or 20 minutes, and we need the mass testing of the majority of the population on a regular basis. But this will only happen if decisions are made about it now. And so I hope the British government and other governments will do that.
But you say you hope they will. I mean, they haven't so far. And one of the things Tony Blair said in that interview was that he thought that the British state, as it were, wasn't functioning properly. And he felt that there needed to be people brought in to make things happen. He didn't mention anyone in terms. I think he might have been thinking of Jeremy Hunt, the former Secretary of State for Health. Do you agree with Blair when it comes to that actually they need to bring in some people now?
I think there needs to be very clear responsibility for the type of thing we've just been talking about. There should be a cabinet minister who is responsible for bringing this about, because understandably other ministers are extremely busy with what they have actually in hand at the moment.
Right, so there should be a minister for testing, basically, a minister for tracking tests.
A minister with great power for testing, because if you look at those countries in the world that have managed to get through this while avoiding the most severe types of lockdown, Germany, South Korea, and so on, it is always to do with testing in one way or another. And it is going to be to do with that again by the time we get to this autumn, but in an even bigger way. And so, yes, senior responsibility with real power to bring this about is needed in government, in my view.
Lord Hague, thank you very much.